Thank you, Faith. And yeah, hi everybody. It's good to be back with Sangha Live. I'm just reading all the greetings. It's really heartwarming. Nice to see you all here. Thank you for joining this week of the daily practices that I'll be leading this week. As Faith said, today is the beginning of a 5-part teaching on the cultivation of the 5 spiritual powers in your meditation practice primarily, and then of course in your life as extension. And these 5 spiritual powers, they're called they have a few different titles. They're looked at a few different ways. One is the 5 controlling faculties. It's core teaching of Vipassana meditation. And there's a very good chance that for those Vipassana yogis that are joining us, and I'm sure there's more than a few here, there's a very good chance you've heard this teaching before. But as my own meditation teacher, Sadhu Pandita, used to always say, if you've heard this before and you already know it, hear it again and know it more. And that's what our meditation practice is. We sit down, we look at the breath, whatever it is we happen to be contemplating, and we know it. And we may have seen it or observed it or been with it or experienced it thousands of times. But every time we observe it, know it, experience it afresh and anew, it's always different. It's like you cannot step into the same river twice. You cannot experience, and this is a fact, just find out for yourself, practice, but you cannot experience the same breath twice. Be that as it may. If you've ever practiced in a traditional early Buddhist country, Thailand, Burma, Laos, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, the Theravada traditions, you'll see this a lot. These teachings of the 5 spiritual powers, or the 5 controlling faculties. And in fact, my own home monastery, meditation center, tradition, family, whatever, Dharma family, this is a key thing. I practice with Sadhu Pandita, Pandita Rama in Rangoon, Burma, Myanmar. And it's their logo. The monastery, on the gate, they have this lotus flower with 5 petals and the central piece of the lotus. And that represents, 4 petals and the central piece of the lotus, that represents the 5 spiritual powers. And these 5 spiritual powers in Pali are none other than Sada, Vidya, Sati, Samadhi, and Panya. In English, it's faith, energetic effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And these 5 spiritual powers, like any other power, they need to be first accessed and awakened, which happens naturally in the practice of mindfulness-based meditation. Happens naturally, sooner or later. These spiritual powers need to be accessed, and they will be accessed. These spiritual powers need to be awakened, and they will awaken in your practice. And I'm sure for many of us here, they're already awakened. They need to be cultivated. In other words, strengthened, almost like, you go to the gym and you strengthen your muscles, or you do some math or whatever, and you strengthen your brain. They need to be developed, cultivated, strengthened is another way to look at it. And they need to be, the old saying goes, use it or lose it. They need to be expressed, brought in, cultivated, integrated into not just our meditation practice, but into how we live in our life. And nice thing about this list, we have five powers, 5 days. So we're going to do Faith Monday. We're going to do Energetic Effort Tuesday. We're going to do Mindfulness Wednesday. We're going to do Concentration Thursday. And Friday, TGIF. It's going to be Wisdom Friday. So stick around for the week if you can. And we'll go through all of these. Today we're going to start with faith. And it's kind of appropriate that we start with faith because it all begins with faith. Not that you don't need faith at every single step of the way. Sometimes in our practice, when we've kind of found our stride, or we're in a effortless phase of the practice, kind of like kind of like on the highway with cruise control, not much effort putting in the practice, it's just going really nice. Faith is not needed. It's not necessary. Although it's there, it's just not necessary. Certainly at the beginning, faith is needed, and then it's also needed at certain points along the practice, and it's certainly needed when faith completely, in the more advanced stages of the practice, when faith completely disappears. Oh my God, kind of a dark night of the soul. We need to somehow hold faith. And then, of course, faith needs to be there at the very end, even though to say that there's an end of the practice is not completely correct. There is a goal, and faith is needed also to kind of reach the goal. So if we look at faith, we're going to talk about 3 types of faith. And these 3 types of faith are something that we all kind of have. We all have the first type of faith for sure. Many of us are already, probably, maybe even all of us are working on that second type of faith. And the third type of faith is probably either in our experience already or somewhere in the future. These 3 types of faith are none other than preliminary faith. Second type of faith is verified faith. And the third type of faith is culminating faith. So preliminary faith, it's the preliminary faith is the faith that we need to get our butts on the cushion. It's the faith that we need to undertake any new endeavor. Why would we undertake a new endeavor? Because there's something outside of my experience, outside of the boundaries of who I am, that I see that inspires me. Oh my God, what an inspiring person. What an inspiring teaching. What an inspiring perspective. That's so great. And when we see it, and when it awakens inspiration in us, what we are seeing is our very own future potential coming to meet us in the present. Wow. You see somebody that inspires you, or you meet a teacher, or you listen to a teacher, or you read a poetry, you see a work of art, or you just see somebody who is it's just so gracefully skillful, even a genius in what they do. And you're like, oh my God. And there's something in you that wants to move towards that. That awakens faith. And it could be momentary, it could be really strong, it doesn't matter, but it gets the motivation for us to do that. The preliminary faith is what we all need to get started. And you would not be here right now if you didn't already have the preliminary faith. It's like a rocket, a rocket that lifts off from the earth. They say that something like 80% or 90% of all the fuel in the rocket is for that first 10 or 20% of the lift, because that's where the gravity is the strongest. So it takes the most power, the most lift to get out of there. That first type of faith, that preliminary faith, is to get us lifted into the practice. But if it was just the preliminary faith, it wouldn't be enough, because the gravitational force, the inertia of our egoic existence, our sense of self, the inertia will pull us back down. So we need that second type of faith to get a boost in our practice. What is the second type of faith? It's verified faith. That suddenly you sit and you practice, and part and parcel of the practice is the teachings of the practice. And lo and behold, these teachings begin to awaken in your practice. Oh my gosh. For example, you started meditation, you sit down, you maybe get an instruction on how to be mindful and maybe to watch the breath or whatever the particular technique might be. And then sooner or later, usually quite soon in any type of, basic meditation instructions, you will be confronted with the 5 hindrances. Yeah, that as you start to kind of, heat up your consciousness with mindfulness, it starts the expanding process. There are certain defense mechanisms that are built into the sense of self that want you to stop that. So, for example, desires are going to arise. For example, aversions are going to arise. For example, sleepiness and restlessness are going to rise. Doubts about the practice, doubts about the teachings, doubts about the Buddha, doubts about Jesus, doubts about any type of spiritual teacher, spiritual exemplar, and doubts about any type of spiritual teacher all come up, yeah, that kind of pull you back down to earth, that kill your faith. And it may be true, it may be worthy to have certain doubts about certain things in life, but fundamentally, if the ego is falling back on the doubt so it doesn't have to continue to practice, then that is clearly a hindrance. And by the way, when I use the word ego, I use it in the most respectful way. You know, we all have egos, and let's all have healthy, happy, mature, functional, and even transparent egos that are kind of adaptable and flexible. But when that gets contracted down, then faith gets killed. So what we need as the practice starts to get a little bit challenging, as we reach the edge of our comfort zone and we get in that developmental zone where there's a little bit of tension, we need to hold our faith, that preliminary faith, until we start seeing fruits of the practice. For example, hindrances are going to come up. You're going to sit down, you're going to meditate, and your mind, for beginners, not just beginners, but your mind is going to be overcome with hindrances. Wow. So you sit down, you practice. Cool. Look at the breath. Cool. Let me taste a raisin. Oh, mindfulness. It's all good stuff. So you're inspired to practice. And then suddenly the practice gets difficult. But if you reflect, wow, this difficulty is just desire. This difficulty is just aversion. This difficulty is it's all the things that the Buddha said were going to come up. Oh my God, they're coming up. The practice is working. These hindrances are not arising in spite of my practice. These hindrances are arising because of the practice. The process is working. That, when you make that connection, when you kind of reframe and look at that, that will verify your faith. Then when you start to see the differentiation between mind and matter, oh my God, this is mind and this is matter. Then when you start to see the connection, the cause and effect, oh my God, I have that thought. It creates this sensation in my body. I have this pain in my knee. It creates these worries in my mind. And you start to see the direct connections. That's a verification of the faith, that you are moving through the progress of insight. Then even if you find yourself dropping in to what's called process-oriented consciousness, that you can see experience from the beginning through the middle to the end, to the next experience from the beginning to the middle to the end, and you're able to follow a process without the mind jumping to the future, without the mind ruminating on the past, without the fears and desires coming up. You're just able to be in that constantly changing, evolving, impermanent experience. Boom, your faith gets another boost because you are seeing insight. These three things I just mentioned, these are insights. Of course, if you have peak experiences, flashing lights, colors, all kinds of far out stuff, then you really get a boost and that faith gets verified. For all of us, we need preliminary faith to get started. For the majority of meditators, we're really working on this second type of faith, that we have long dry spells in our meditation. But every now and then you're going to see there's going to some interesting experiences going to happen, and you know that the process is working. Those are those are verifications of your faith, and they give a little boost. Just like the booster rocket needs another boost to go further, those experiences boost our faith. Second type of faith is the verification of faith, and we need that a lot. Sometimes we get that externally, like an external hard drive. We plug into a teacher or a sangha or teaching, we get that, but then we cultivate it in ourselves. Which leads to the third type of faith, which is culminating faith, which I'm just going to finish off the talk in about another minute, and then we're going to practice. And that's when you kind of reach the goal of the path, and you have certain experiences that take you into the deepest experience of anicca, dukkha, and anatta. And you awaken to anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. These are the three universal characteristics of all physical and non-physical phenomena in the universe. They're conditioned by impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. The more you see this in your practice, vipassana is the contemplation, the repeated contemplation of these universal characteristics. The more that you see this and the mind moves from a false view of permanence, a false view that there's ultimate satisfaction in all experience, a false view that there's ultimately a sense of self. As the practice shifts out of that and you go through a transformation to see the reality, the Dhamma, the ultimate reality of anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self, Seeing that again and again verifies our faith. When you reach a culminating experience of seeing anatta, non-self, in its deepest way, boom, the faith culminates. The faith gets, it's like that rocket. It gets the boost. It's just up at the atmosphere. It just needs a little, and then it's free of the Earth's gravitational pull. This is the realization of the path, experience of Nibbana. Once and for all, you will see through it all, and you'll still be identified. There's still, there's levels of awakening in Vipassana meditation, but you'll no longer be fooled. You'll no longer be confused. You'll no longer have what they call in Buddhism, the false view that the sense of self is permanent. That is a liberating, transformational experience. And at that point, and we're going to practice now, at that point, faith is culminated. Doubts are gone. Doubts in the Buddha, doubts in the Dharma, doubts in the Sangha, doubts that mindfulness-based meditation, that Vipassana meditation, or any other awareness-based meditation, doubts that this is a true, authentic path of awakening. Those doubts are gone forever and always, uprooted, purified from this stream of consciousness. At this point, the actual culmination of faith is unshakable. 3 types of faith. Preliminary faith, we all have that. Verified faith, we are working on that right now. Culminating faith, we're all moving towards culminating faith. So we'll save all the questions for the end. Let's go ahead and practice now, and I'll give a little bit of a guided meditation at the beginning, and then we'll come out at, we've gone over time a little bit. We'll come out at 50 minutes past. Finding a comfortable position. Take a moment and reflect on the faith that brought you here. That's the preliminary faith. I just want to be with my friends in Sangha Live, or I just want to meditate. It's so good to be with the community. Or who's this Miles guy? I've meditated with him before. I want to meditate with him again. Or let's go check it out. Or I like this topic on the 5 spiritual powers. Whatever it is that brought you here, know that that's the preliminary faith. And I'll take a moment that what you experience in this practice, every moment is a moment or an opportunity of the second type of faith, the verification. So as you settle in with whatever Vipassana method you might be using, mindfulness method you might be using, I'll speak about the breath, but you can apply that to anything. As you settle your mindfulness on the breath, as you gently, subtly hold your attention on the precise sensations in the body as you breathe in, and precise sensations on the body as you breathe out. Know that part of this process is that the mind will throw up the hindrances, the defense mechanisms to keep you from contemplating in this way. So should desires, should aversions, should fears, should restlessness, should doubts, or sleepiness arise in your practice, the moment you're mindful of that, slightly differentiate, observe it, be mindful of it as an object in your experience to slip away from the identification. And then also reflect that, these are not coming up in spite of the practice. These are coming up because of the practice. The teaching of the hindrances verifies that you are on the right track. If your mind is more focused, more calm, settling in on the practice, less stormy from the hindrances, continue to observe the breath. Noticing the precise physical sensations as you breathe in, the precise physical sensations as you breathe out. And at some point, you might notice that there is just the observing mind and the experienced observed, nothing else in between. This experience of namarupa, of mind and matter, pure, simple mind and matter, verifies that you are on the inner path, that you have entered the inner path of meditation. During the sitting, should you notice any connections? This thought leads to that thought leads to sweat on my forehead, the sweat on my forehead leads to an itch, the itch leads to wanting to scratch, the wanting to scratch leads to my hand coming up and scratching my head or whatever. Should you notice that cause and effect? Know that you are seeing insight, that the unmeditative mind cannot see that process, that you are seeing the connection of experience. You might notice that the breath has a beginning, it goes all the way to the end, and you're able to follow it to the end. And perhaps there's a pause, perhaps there's no pause. But if you're right there at the end, if you're right there observing the subtle sensations in the pause, knowing the qualities of that pause, no matter how short, and then you're right there at the beginning of the out breath, following all the sensations of the out breath to its end, knowing how it stops slowly, gradually, suddenly, noticing if there's a pause or no pause, noticing if there is quality to that pause. Then you will be there for the very beginning of the next in breath. When you can see the complete process, beginning, continuously through the middle, continuously to the end, noticing pause or no pause, not manipulating the breath in any way, allowing it to be natural. Then seeing the beginning, the middle, and the end of the next out breath. You will know that you are in process-oriented consciousness, and you'll get a boost in your faith to continue the practice. And should you be there, fully mindful, noticing impermanence, the universal characteristic of change right before your very eyes. And as change matures, should you notice how that leads to always some sense of dissatisfaction in the mind or the body. It could be wanting it to stay the same. It could be not happy with the way it's changing. The breath was soft. Now the breath is getting hard. Oh my God, I don't like that. Let me regulate my breath. Sometimes it's good to regulate the breath. In Vipassana meditation, refrain from regulating the breath. Let the breath do what it's doing, because you are seeing the universal characteristic of anicca, change. And if it becomes unsatisfying, you are seeing the universal characteristic of dukkha, unsatisfactoriness. That is insight. Knowing that will inspire faith. And should the practice suddenly release in a momentary shift, release, become at ease and effortless, know that you are seeing the universal characteristic of anatta, non-self, arising in your very practice. And seeing that directly will inspire your faith, will verify your faith, and carry you forward in the practice. With each breath, in each moment by moment, breath by breath. And bring your mindfulness back to the body. Feel the body. Bring your mindfulness back to the breath. Feel the breath and know the subtle qualities and characteristics just as they are. No agenda, no manipulation. Bring your mindfulness back to the mind, knowing your mental state just as it is. No preference, total acceptance, gentle, open mindfulness. And bring your mindfulness to the space on the inside. And as you slowly open your eyes, coming out of the meditation, bring your mindfulness to the space on the outside around you. And just resting in this open meditative space, your post-meditation glow. And in this space, just reflect for a moment. Was there anything in my practice that I experienced that verified my faith that this is a forward-leading path, that the practice is unfolding? And reflect for just a moment. Was there anything in the previous talk that I gave that inspired you, that gave you faith in the practice? And finally, reflect on any inspiration that came from my talk. Know that as the first type of faith, the preliminary faith. Even if you've been practicing for a long time, it's like, oh, that's a new look. That's a new perspective. Wow. Let's see if I can align with it. That's that first faith. If you saw anything in your practice that, like, oh, wow, okay, this means I'm on the path. This is an indicator the practice is effective. That's the second type of faith. It's internal, self-caused. Okay. Speaking of faith, now faith, Bosworth faith, the one and only type of faith, faith Bosworth. Sorry, it's a bit weird now, but I believe we're in a Q&A segment of our practice. So if you want to open up the mics and invite people in to ask questions. Hello, Faith. Okay, so while we're waiting for Faith to come back or wherever she went, if anybody wants to type a question in to the chat, then I'll be very happy to address it. There she is.
Hi, I'm here.
Hey,
but
Faith.
I don't need to come on. So.
Oh, is that right? Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
all right.
But thank you.
Yeah, it's the first time I'm using this software.
Yeah, I know.
So
I know.
I don't know how it works.
So anyone who wants to come on, yeah, you know what to do. Raise your hand, and I'll bring you on. Otherwise, type your question in the chat. All right.
Great. So if I understand you correctly, I can also bring them in if somebody raises their hand? You're either muted or frozen. I'm not sure. So does anybody have any questions about your practice or about the talk that I gave about faith? Practical questions also welcome, because that's basically the majority of the questions that I work with people are kind of practical, practice related questions. And as or as Faith mentioned in the introduction, I'm from the Mahasi tradition, and every Vipassana tradition is slightly different. They have their strengths. And one of the strengths of Mahasi tradition is that it works with the progressive insight, so that there's, the practice unfolds in very clear-cut developmental insight stages. And, the majority of the people I notice are kind of in those first three stages where there's a lot of hindrances, a lot of challenges, a lot of difficulties. So any questions related to that whatsoever, or even other things in your practice, I'll be happy to address. It's interesting. I always find it like after a talk, often you'll get questions, or I'll get questions. After a meditation period, there's tends to be fewer questions because people are in just a different state, kind of a non-intellectual state. But this is an opportunity. One of the foundations of our meditation practice is something called Dharma discussion. That's when you discuss the theory in reflection to your practice and how they meet or they don't meet. So Kevin has a question here. Kevin says, can you speak of great faith, great doubt in our practice? Oh, I don't think so, Kevin. I'll tell you why. Because as I understand, the teaching of great doubt comes from Zen Buddhism, if I'm not mistaken. And that's just not my tradition. I know that like the idea of great doubt is considered to be something positive and in that tradition, and I think it is. I'm sure that if I listened to it, that I would agree with that. From a Vipassana point of view, doubt is just a contraction of the ego. That as consciousness wants to expand, any doubts that come up are going to contract us. So that needs to be worked through. And there are early stages, middle stages, and even late stages doubt, but they're just hindrances. Another form of the contracted sense of self, throwing up some obstacles to stop the practice. All that gets worked through. It all gets worked through in the long run over the practice. And quite literally, doubt gets uprooted forever and always in your stream of consciousness with attainment of the first path of awakening, the Sotapanna, the stream enterer. So I'll leave the question there. Maddie has a question. Maddie says, I did walking meditation yesterday. Good for you, Maddie. I felt non-self. Can you say more about that? Well, to say I felt non-self doesn't tell me much. Maddie, I'd have to understand what you felt. If you want to open up your mic or raise your hand, I'll be happy to do that. Non-self, it's an idea, but it manifests in very specific ways. So, yeah. We would need to get into a little bit more of a phenomenological discussion. If you want to raise your hand, if you want to come online, I'll be happy to do that. If not, I'll just say that the phenomena of non-self, let's just take the breath as an example. Could be the same thing with walking meditation. Sometimes we're breathing and there's tightness in the breath and maybe the posture is rigid and there's a lot of pains and it's hard to kind of hold it all together. That's forward leading. That's what's happening in the practice. That's your path. So doing breath regulations and yoga stretching and all that stuff, healthy as that is, breath work and stuff like that, healthy that it is not Vipassana. You want to allow that process to happen. That's the dukkha stage, and you want to allow that to come up, dukkha phase. Now, what happens when non-self comes online is all that suddenly there's a shift, it all drops, and the breath becomes freer, looser. It might be incredibly slight and imperceptible. It might be long and expansive. It can be either way. But it has the quality of effortlessness. And the mind tends to be pretty quiet at that point. So I'll just give a short answer there. Heidi, hello, Heidi. I'm relatively new to formal practice. Welcome. But feel that parts of me have been very awake for years. Nice. I found your talk helpful in several ways. It also provoked my questions around where am I on my journey? Okay, that's a natural question that can come up. As if I need to know where I am on the map. Also natural. I feel a lack of orientation and lostness, and which is very uncomfortable. Also natural in the path, but I'm guessing this is actually what I need to work on. Thoughts on this? Yeah, there's, in terms of wanting to know where you are on your journey, there are maps to the practice, and there's traditional maps, and there are schools that follow those maps. That's the tradition I come out of. There are schools that just don't use the maps at all. I believe Martin it comes from that one of those traditions. I don't believe it. I know it. And they're both of these traditions are solid, really beautiful expressions of Buddha Dharma, solid Vipassana traditions. But the problem with maps is that you can get a little bit too much goal oriented and stuck on the map because the map is not the territory, as we know. The strength of maps is that it gives you a little bit of context. It helps you know, no, this is okay. You're exactly where you need to be. The problem of no maps is that sometimes it can be a little bit floating around. The strength of no maps is that it just relaxes the achieving mind. It's like the achieving mind gets us nowhere in meditation. So pick whatever you want. They're both very good. But here's the deal. Heidi, maybe you're German, but there's an old English poem about a man on the way to St. Ives. He met him. Now, I was on the way to St. Ives. I met a man with 7 wives. The 7 wives had 7 cats. The 7 cats had 7 kittens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then the riddle is how many were on the road to St. Ives or whatever. So you get into this whole thing. The point is not how many this, how many that, where am I at, what's going on. The point is there's St. Ives, which is the goal. There is a goal in our practice, awakening, call it whatever you want. And there's a path. Know that you're on the path with simply mindfully knowing where you're at in the present moment. Know the qualities and characteristics of your experience and know what happens to that experience. And through that, you will know that you are on the path to St. Ives. It's unfolding naturally. So short and sweet. Okay. Maddie says now she wants to come on screen. We only have another minute. Maddie, I'll be happy to take your question tomorrow if you come back. But we have to dialogue about that. Okay. So that's up to you to show up tomorrow or any other day this week, and I'll bring you on. John, I think I have time for just one more quickie. John says your articulation of how faith develops really is present in my own experience, which helps with my sense of common humanity, confronts the isolation that I feel sometimes. Yeah, touch me, John. That's beautiful. I feel the same way. Emma says you brought the 5 hindrances. You brought the 5 hindrances and the 5 powers together in some way in your talk, as if the powers perhaps an antidote. Well, they're not antidotes, but here's what happens. So the stream of consciousness, and this is going to be the last thing, and I know we got time. The stream of consciousness is dominated with the hindrances or unwholesome mental states: greed, desire, aversion, greed, hatred, and desires. Yeah, greed, hatred, and delusion. That's it. Greed, hatred, and delusion. It's dominated. As we do our mindfulness-based meditation, those will reduce. These include the hindrances. And these 5 spiritual powers will start to come online and become stronger. It's like they get replaced. Now, there is a bit of a struggle between, the good shoulder or the devil on this side and the angel on this side. It's maybe not the best metaphor, but there is a little bit of struggle between, these two things. But long term, with just practicing mindfulness, these will shift. So that's the balance between the two. And that's why these spiritual powers, not only do they need to be awakened, and we're at time, not only do they need to be accessed, but they need to be cultivated. And when we're seeing them come online, just knowing that, reflecting on that, is the cultivation process. Okay? All right, Emma. That's it for today, everybody. Thank you very much. And tomorrow we're going to be on today's Monday, Faith. Tuesday will be energetic effort, the E word. We're going to reclaim effort as a good thing and maybe even talk about where it's problematic. But without energetic effort, happens in the practice. Thank you all very much. I hope you have a wonderful day, and may your practice lead you forward, and may your faith, the preliminary faith, awaken. May the verification of faith strengthen, and may the culmination of faith be yours, so that doubts about the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha in your practice are uprooted once and for all, forever and always. Have a great day.